Okay, Marius, welcome to the Space podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Great, great. No, thanks for coming on. And what we will be discussing today is that dreaded acronym that we just can't seem to shift, AI. And what we're going to be discussing is it a buzzword or is it a breakthrough? But before we get into it, Marius, are you okay just to let the audience know a little bit about yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Marius. I'm currently a CISO at Go Financial Services. So we are a white label consumer financing business, predominantly working in the telco space. And I also run MP cybersecurity services, where my kind of goal is to build out two of the main services. It's helping SMBs, whether it's VCs or fractional CISO services. I think there is in the market, we're continuously talking about things like, does the company need a CISO or not? Most of the time they do, but they're not necessarily needed full time. They just need a bit of high guidance and sort of understanding what are the main risks they need to be worried about and just some help to guide them into that journey. And secondly, as we kind of alluded here, I've done a lot of work in AI, and I think you obviously most of the businesses are speeding ahead in AI adoption, but they're not necessarily understanding the risks that that brings. So
Mm.
I'm trying to guide and help businesses understand how to secure, first of all, AI solutions, but what potentially risks they are bringing and through sort of what lens they should be looking at. Because I think one thing that's usually is overlooked is, and I think it even kind of expands security, when you adopt an AI, this whole new thing about, there is potential reputational damages, there's potential, um, privacy concerns. There's a lot more to it that I think expands way beyond just security. And I think, people need to understand what's the implications where things go wrong.
Mm, absolutely. So, I'm just going to throw you in with a nice, easy question more than anything. AI and security in AI, because you've mentioned there a lot about your involvement with AI and security, but it's often thrown together without actually thinking what it actually means. So, could you actually explain to the audience as we go in as a helicopter overview, what is the difference between AI and security in AI?
Well, I think there was obviously the main difference is that, AI insecurity is we are leveraging artificial intelligence to help us secure the business. So whether, there are various kind of applications that we currently leveraging, because I think the one thing where AI could really help, and I think people need to understand one thing is AI is not at the stage where it can replace humans,
Mm,
but AI can definitely help you and guide you. AI is amazing at sifting through vast amount of data and building correlations and detecting anomalies. So using AI in security, for example, you can use it in security operation centers as, first line of defense and first line of support, just to correlate and see, there's vast amount of data, there's potentially sometimes vast number of incidents, but should you be worried about these particular incidents, AI can correlate a bit that information and help you. Sometimes you can even add AI to do particular research about, whether it's IP addresses, whether it's indicators of compromise and things like that. So it's essentially a helping hand you to sift through vast amount of data and help you guide you in decision making. Now, security in AI is completely different because AI is proliferation across, everywhere. We are adopting AI in sales, in business development, in legal, but we need to make sure that these solutions are secure. So that's where security in AI comes from. We need to understand, I think one thing that people need to understand when you're adopting AI, the old school tools and technologies not necessarily are helpful because they are not context aware. So, for example, using layer seven firewalls, it won't understand and it won't help you do prompt injection detections and things like that. So you need a new way to detect and remediate threats in your AI adoption journey. So I think that's the kind of the main crux and the main difference in the two.
absolutely, no, really interesting, and like you say, it's an important topic, especially at this moment in time. And And I suppose I just want to sort of segue into a topic that is quite close to both of our worlds, to be honest with you, and it is the cybersecurity vendor startup world. And 2025, obviously we're coming to the end of H1 already, and we're already seeing it's been a great year, I think, actually for funding, or at least it's felt like it, especially in the last 2 weeks on the lead up to RSA. There's been so much funding, and a lot of that has been towards AI security vendors, which is quite indicative of where the market is going. So my question to you, Marius, is: do you think that AI security products are here to stay, they're here to dominate, or do you think that they're a little bit in their infancy and all this funding is a catalyst to see where it can get to? Do you think it's going to be innovation and do you think it might pop? Or do you think that no, this is the start of a serious age here?
It's kind of between the two, I think. I think the problem is that some of the vendors are purely driven by valuation and getting to that, whether it's a sale, whether it's acquisition, potentially, I think less of them are doing IPOs now. But the problem is that nowadays everyone's putting AI inside because potentially whenever you put out those words, it gives you 5x valuation. Now, the problem is at some point this bubble has to burst because the market is so big. And I think even it's really interesting to see how, for example, Ross Haliluk's post from yesterday was that you know there are big vendors who build markets, and normally they build products that are unattainable for most of the smaller businesses. So you can carve a niche to do, for example, 80% of the capability of the big vendor for maybe 30% of the cost. But you need to understand your market and your end user. And sometimes, people, markets sometimes can become so oversaturated that becomes hard to, it'll distinguish, the boys between the men. So the market is definitely there to stay. It's just about, I think, innovation and how we solve certain problems is because AI is definitely here to stay and AI is just going to grow. But it's about understanding where the risks lies and where the problems that we need to solve that we care about. There is obviously organizations and vendors looking to solve challenges via different lens just because of differentiation. So I think at some point we'll develop certain standards, whenever we go into Magic Quadrants and Gartner, they'll establish some kind of, segment of that space. And I think it'll there to stay. I think the interesting part is here that the AI moving so quick, can the vendors keep up? The model race, what sparked with the DeepSeek seems like it just took off the model race. So we have in new models pretty much every week, and someone's trying to beat their score with a better model. I think the goal and where I see it going is we kind of want to probably build to the level of the tools that they're going to become model agnostic.
Hmm.
So you will have a specific problem and you will have behind the hood maybe five, six models that it can automatically detect and pick the best model for that specific problem to be solved. Now, I want to caveat one thing here though. With the race of valuation and people putting, saying it's AI company, there are real AI companies and there are companies who build a UI front and using OpenAI API behind the scenes. You're not an AI company. You're just using an API from one of the big boys. So it's an important distinguishing thing I think that you need to understand that not every AI company is actual AI company.
Absolutely, and that's what I wanted to ask you next. What do you think the implications of that will actually be? Those that say like, "Oh yeah, we do AI." Well, no, you do a bit of automation, and it's not necessarily the same. So, what do you think the implications of saying that you do AI and you actually don't?
Well, I think the main thing is obviously it's data security and data residency. You know, there are perfectly viable applications where you can use ChatGPT, Claude, and things like that, where there is no PII, there is no sensitive business data. That's perfectly fine to improve business efficiency. Now, you need to make sure that you build robust plans in your business to understand which models you need to own, what data you need to protect, and how do you need to segregate intellectual property, for example. So whether it's, code building, whether it's PI protection and how you use internal models versus, business efficiency, replying to maybe non-sensitive emails, maybe just improving people's day-to-day work. There was a I don't know if you saw, there was a really interesting post, and that really kind of, I think, currently sums up AI. So they said that 2025, about 50% of the code will be built via AI. 2026, there'll be 100% of the code built via AI. And then 2027, we're going to look for developers to repair the crappy code that AI built in 2026.
So it comes full circle then, as
Yeah.
as anything does in life. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I've been even just been talking about with people about pen testing recently, and I think sometimes, some of these things are overlooked. Most of the pen testing companies, they kind of do 90% of what everyone else does. But, it's easy to run automated tools and discover most of the vulnerabilities. But in my head, pen testing is like an art. You only build the muscle in the brain through years of experience to understand where things can go wrong. And I think that's an art where someone's experience can highlight and think about, oh, I think this might be potential danger here or there. And I think that's what differentiates the good pen testing versus just any other pen testing company.
Mm, absolutely. And I think before we move on from the vendor world, I just wanted to ask you a quick question around obviously Wiz, and they were going to be on the projection of being, the first 100 bill valued company. Obviously that didn't happen. Now with the acquisition or the impending acquisition, once that goes through. But do you think that an AI vendor will be the first one to reach said valuation when I will say it, when we inevitably hit that range?
Potentially, yeah. I think, sorry, I think there is a couple of problems with some of these vendors because A, there's different routes how vendors go towards growth. And the problem is with obviously security, tool sort of consolidation versus platform. Now, there are vendors who actually build a state-of-the-art platform that address number of problems, and they can usually scale very rapidly. But on the flip side, there are businesses and vendors who build platforms through acquisitions. And then what normally happens is just becomes a sort of scattered dashboard of tools that don't really work or integrate well together. And that's where problems can fall by the wayside. And usually, it doesn't really work. And they reach a certain threshold where they start losing to a smaller people who solve particular problems better. And I think, that's always constant sort of flux where people thinking about addressing risk of having all eggs in one basket versus having expertise in specific niche areas. But it certainly can happen. I think, currently, obviously, Wiz is the leading player in cloud security. But, things change and shape. What Google recently did, there's always the fierce competition in the market. And, there are certain companies how, do shady tactics, let's say, in sales, um, and grow without actually having a great product. So it's interesting how it's going to form because, as you say, there's loads of AI companies currently being spawned. Now, who's there to stay? It will be interesting to see how this develops over the next couple of years. And we got potentially quantum around the corner as well, so that's going to do another shake up of the market and see how that impacts AI growth. Will be very interesting to see.
Yes, absolutely. I can't remember. I'll have to put a link to it at the bottom of this podcast. But I was listening to something now. Sort of quantum is very very close to being sort of the next sort of dominating sphere
Yeah.
in the market. It's when I was listening to it, I was trying to just like keep up and understand the actual technical nuances of it. But I was like, wow, this is this is insane stuff, to be honest with you. And it sounds like there's always something new to learn about this industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a few questions as well I just wanted to raise because I think sometimes it's not being talked about. I don't know if you saw an article, I think was it Mark Zuckerberg
Okay.
or the guy from OpenAI who said, please and thank you is currently costing millions and
Yes.
millions of pounds. And the one thing which we're currently not talking, the energy consumption of AI and how is that going to shape? Because
Mhm.
we ideally we want to move to clean energy because the energy consumption of AI is becoming crazy.
Mhm.
And then secondly is, with as with every technology, I think the problem is that there are third world countries who cannot afford AI. So the separation between the West and the third world countries is going to becoming exorbitantly bigger and bigger.
Mm.
And how do we solve those problems to make sure that, everyone can benefit from technology advancement is something that we have to, consider it moving forward.
Mm. I think to come back on on them two sort of questions raised, I think the first one, well, around the clean energy. I think the sweet irony and what will answer that will be an AI solution that will figure out how to sort of produce more clean energy as a result of of its output. And I think that's my two pence. And then the latter part of what you were saying there around sort of the Western cultures as opposed to the rest and the differences in technological advancements. I don't think that's anything new. I think like you've just got to look at what we were saying earlier around the previous times around how everything comes full circle and sort of you say when Ford came out and the industrialization era came through and that was sort of the first split in sort of the landscape of different cultures. So, and everyone thought like, oh, how's that going to impact the West to the rest? And then we're in the age of technology now, and then obviously now AI, and it's like there's always something new that will divide it. But I do think that yes, this will further amplify it as opposed to it being anything new. So I
Yeah.
think that whilst it's still an issue. I don't think it's a new issue. I think there's always going to be discrepancies as a result, and there'll be something new around the corner as
Oh
well.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, interesting point. But yeah, so I'm gonna just kind of get you to choose your side of the fence now more than anything, Marius, as we sort of approach the last 10 minutes. Is what do you think AI is then? Do you think it's just a buzzword, or do you think it's a breakthrough?
I think it's a breakthrough. I think there are applications that can definitely help. Just on a sometimes even some simple things. I've currently been reading. I've done a lot of reading, and I've been reading a book called Blink about conscious and unconscious decision making, and how sometimes people have too much information, therefore that impacts their decision making, and sometimes it's kind of the difference to understand how to make a good decision between not. But I think, for example, I think one place where it's definitely seen great advancements is in healthcare.
Mhm.
It's becoming to a point where it can potentially have be a better predictor of diseases and potentially problems than doctors. So, with through, imagery reviews and things like that, where I think, for example, we well know in UK how NHS lines for specific things are, becoming increasingly long. So if we can aid certain decision making, that's only going to help. I think the main problem which we still need to solve it. Usually AI is being thought as black opaque box. How do we trust that decision is this making is accurate, and how we prevent from it being exploited and infiltrated? Because one thing that there is a risk, obviously, and again, I read a lot of research in AI. There was a research done that said if you change in the medical field, if you change 8% of data out of 100%, you just inject 8% fake data. It had for 50% of um, patients a 75% variance in dosages. Now, 7%, 75% variance in dosage could potentially be lethal. just by injecting 8% of fake data. So, eh, same as anywhere else, but the AI solution in sort of, in these potential life and death situations, the security of it will be the most important and paramount thing.
Mm, absolutely. And it's just the fact that we're even having these discussions now as to how AI is having an impact on lives is the fact that it's a testament as to where it is in this day of age now. Um, I think my viewpoint on that is the fact that I'm still making up. I'm trying to understand where it is in its lifespan. I think it's brilliant. I think I absolutely don't think it's a buzzword. I think it's thrown around as a buzzword only because it's now penetrated the mainstream, and as such, the mainstream need to understand it the way that they can,
Yeah.
which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that like cool, it's in the mainstream and it's being talked about because for how long, and I'm not saying that AI is exclusive to cyber, we're obviously got a cyber arc in it given our roles, but cybersecurity is often we're constantly fighting a battle of okay, it's his own entity. We're trying to get it into the boardroom, and we're getting there, and we're trying to recognize that it is a serious issue and you need to pay attention to it. And I think we're getting there. But I think that AI has just come up and ran its own race and is now, I think it's gone ahead of cyber actually already in its early days. And it's kind of flexing its muscles right now. And what I would say is, I think it's in its turbulent teenager days. I think it very much is very cool product. I think like you say, a lot of it is it's an LLM, so it's learning a lot. It's got a lot to learn. It can't be trusted inherently yet for it to be its own parameter. And it needs to. And the turbulent teenager is my way of understanding it because it wants its freedom, it wants its independence, and it's shown some brilliant potential, phenomenal potential. But it's just still got to have the training wheels on whilst we again bring it back into our world, whilst we secure it right because it's one hell of a beast and it needs to be built in the right way before it's fully out in the mainstream. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Marius.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, we are going through this, as you say, we are in this adoption phase that, yeah, is probably teenage years, and there's going to be a lot of things that needs to be consolidated. I think the one thing which will shape it as well, we need regulation that's going to keep up with it and make sure that it inbuilds protections for, businesses and customers.
Is there any
Um,
regulation in place at the moment?
There are there's been white papers published, but I think they are in consultation of how this regulation is going to work and shape. There is, I think, EU AI Act. There's some good documents published by UK government as well about considerations for specific departments. For example, if you're building AI products, what legal considerations you need to have, what supply chain considerations you need to have. So there's really good sort of a checkbox assessment that you can do. There's various companies doing some great work. For example, Databricks have developed AI security framework that allows you to uh, uncover risks in all of the steps than when you're building AI, and it's really good sort of visual implementation to think about controls that you need to build. So there's steps there, but I think once that kind of the dust settles, there's going to be a pragmatic sort of considerations to make sure that we don't make grave mistakes in this journey.
Mm, and rightly so, because there is going to be some mistakes along this way. Absolutely, but you know what I mean. We like
Yeah, it's inevitable. Bad things going to happen, but we need to make sure, as with everything, we learn from the bad things, we adapt, and make sure we don't repeat our mistakes. There's, incidents going to happen, and nobody's sort of, immune to them. But it's a lesson that we need to think and adapt and change and make sure that first of all we understand and we don't repeat those mistakes.
yep, absolutely. I suppose I just want to kind of finish off talking a little bit about how AI is going to impact sort of security teams in the next 5 years, and we can sort of segue into the wider organizations as well. I suppose a lot of what I'm seeing in the past few weeks is the ex absolute explosion in terms of agentic AI sort of SOC support, and how sort of the role of L1, L2 SOCs are kind of coming under question because of said product. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on that. What do you sort of think to that? Do you think that, yeah, it sounds amazing, but have you considered sort of like it's already a hard field to get into as well, and therefore are we actually, what's the saying, bite your nose off to spite your face or something like that. I don't think it's
Yeah.
bite, but I've got it channeled my inner Mike Tyson there. But what is your sort of thoughts on sort of this new product that's come into the security operations?
Well, I think it's going to obviously, it's definitely potential has an opportunity to be a help rather than a hindrance.
Okay.
But as you say, there are potential implications in the job market that, yeah, it's gonna impact people coming into the market. But as with everything, I think there's nothing new. We had roles evolving and changing, and I think the beauty of it, people who are at the forefront of self-development, they will be able to adapt and learn new capabilities and new things. Because one thing I think we need to add is, as with kind of we alluded here, AI still can't be 100% trusted. And even if you say employ the AI as L1, you want to have a human in the loop. Because again, there's could be grave things that can happen and mistakes could be made. So I don't think it's gonna completely eliminate, that entry market, but obviously it's gonna potentially, yeah, it's gonna potentially reduce. I've been mentoring people who try to break into their careers for a while now, and I think, people obviously, they watch movies and things like that. They always think like, for example, pen testing is a sexy career. But the problem is, I say always to the guys, look at the numbers. If you look at junior currently roles in cybersecurity, probably 90% of it is in SOC. Now, I said, if I was in your shoes, wouldn't it be easier to apply to roles that are 90 out of the 100 than maybe 1 out of the 100? Because junior pen testing roles is far, far, and far and in between. But once you build a grounding in a SOC, you normally learn pretty much anything about cyber defense. Then your world is your oyster because you can pivot any way you want. But that should be an easy route in. So I'm sure that that's going to narrow, but I'm sure there's going to be other roles that's going to open up. There's potentially, you know, engineering expansion in the same world because I think, you know, with AI, and I think that's going to be an interesting aspect as well for us to think about. Because of AI and vibe coding and all of that, there's a potential chance that then the market's going to suffer because more and more organizations who have security engineering departments, they potentially will go and build their own tools, their own, plugins, their own kind of modifications to the tools that will potentially require maybe less vendor space, especially, big organizations. Usually that's how tools are built. You build internal tool, you leave the organization and actually see that this tool helps to solve a problem, then you create a startup.
Mm, absolutely. It always comes full circle, doesn't it? As I think has been the theme of this podcast, Marius. But just like that, we've pretty much come to our time. So once again, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast today, Marius. If anybody has any questions that you've raised today, I'll be sure to put all your information down below. And also, Marius has a podcast himself, the Cyber Diaries podcast. I will be sure to put the link to that as well in the bottom of this video as well. But once again, Marius, thank you very much for coming on.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me, Nick.